guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing down below. I do tons of different content such as witchy hauls, thrift hauls, crystal hauls. I also do a video series about things that are on my mind where I just talk to you candidly, and I also do a candle review series. And because it is October, I currently have all of my fall content coming out. I do a lot of stuff for October. It's probably when I put out the most videos. So if this is when you are finding my channel, this is probably a good time to jump in as any. Today's video, since it is a Monday, it is my very first spooky stories video for this year. I've been doing this past couple of years, so if you've seen these videos before, welcome back. I'm sure you already know what to expect. And those of you who are new, I like to pick a creepy or scary or macabre story that I want to share with you guys that I like. And I have not done an Edgar Allan Poe story, I think, for 2 years now. I did The Raven a few years ago. But anyways, it is one of my favorite stories by Edgar Allan Poe, and it is called The Masque of the Red Death, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. Now, my fall content schedule is going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Mondays are going to be the spooky stories. So this is the first one, as I said, for this year, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. So this is the copy of Edgar Allan Poe's stories and poems that I have, and I will list this down below, or something similar to it if you guys want to check out any of Edgar Allan Poe's works. He is one of my favorite authors, so I will list that below if you guys want to check it out. So let's just jump right in. The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest band which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of the fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was the extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste, and a strong lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron, and the courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers, and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither in ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned with such precautions the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve, or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There was buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, and there was wine. All these security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged on fiercely abroad, Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene with the masquerade, but the first, let me tell you of the rooms which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many places, however, such suites from a long and straight vista, while folding doors slide back nearly into walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different. As might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre, the apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, at each turn novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with privileged hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple, and its ornaments and tapestries and here panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished with a light orange, and the fifth was white, the sixth was violet, and the 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of these 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of the gold ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from the lamp or candle within the suite of the chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite there stood opposite of each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays throughout the tinted glass that so glaringly illuminated the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings throughout the blood-tinted panes was ghastly and extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be strucken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but so peculiar a note and emphasis that each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there were brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows to each other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and there were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had fine eye for colors and effects, and he disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of 7 chambers, upon occasion of the great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. To be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what had been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem to echo of their step. And anon there strikes of the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but the instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they part. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhe to and fro merrily than ever, taking hue from many tinted windows, through which stream of rays from their tripod. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture there, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from near a clock of ebony muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went rivaling on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told of all things before, but now there was 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell, of the clock, and thus it happened. Perhaps that more of thought crept with more of time into meditations and thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened perhaps that before the last echoes of the last chime and utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of the masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, those arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror and disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such a sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-heroed Herod and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, whom life and death are equally just, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company indeed seemed now deeply feel that the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stifled corpse, that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured if not approved by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbed in blood, and his broad brow, with all that features the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know who we have to hang at sunrise from the battlement." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was bold and a robust man, and the music had become hushed at the wavering of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first as he spoke there was a slight rushing of movement of the group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found no who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step with which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him, to account of a deadly terror, and seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and he had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleamingly upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of his revellers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave remains of the corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by a tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. That is the story of the Masque of the Red Death. Basically, the Masque of the Red Death is this rich prince decides he's going to let a majority of the people die out in the real world, but he's going to take about 1,000 of his little buddies and lock them up in the castle where they can be safe with him while everybody else is left to rot on the outside. But somehow the Red Death still gets in and kills them all. And I loved this story for a few reasons, mostly because it proves that it doesn't matter if you're rich, you're not untouchable to something like that. And instead of being greedy, maybe he should have tried to save more people than what he did, because somebody brought it in anyways. So thankfully I did get to go to a event. I think it was like 6 or 7, maybe even 8 years ago. A place nearby from me had held an event where it was called the Masque of the Red Death. You had to come in costume and you had to bring a mask, and it went on, I think, for like 5 or 6 hours, and it was amazing. They had made rooms of each color. They had bands there. There was a lot of bartenders doing stuff there. There were fire eaters. There was like a little artist gallery where you could buy stuff. Like, they had so much cool stuff going on there, and it was a really cool experience because while all of this was going on where you could check out things during the event, it started out with one person dressed in all red, and they would walk through the masquerade, and slowly over time there's more and more people dressed in all red, and I do have photos of that, so I'll insert them. And they had someone playing Prince Prospero, and they like played out scenes from that during the mask. Every time it would hit another hour, they would play part of it out, and by the end of it, there were so many people clustered around dressed in like red robes. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I wish they would have done it more than just that one year. I think they might have done it one previous year before that, but then they never did it again. But it was a really awesome time, and it was nice to see a play that I love, or a short story that I love, being brought to life. And I love a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's things. I think he had a really good talent for telling stories. So if you guys found this video interesting at all, please give it a thumbs up. Tell me what you thought down below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!